Welcome back to From Washington al Mundo. This is Mauricio Claver-Carone, and I'm pleased to have here my good friend and great Iranian democracy advocate, Shahriar Etminani from the Iran Democratic Union. And we were talking right before we went over to the break, we were talking about the indirect influence, well, the direct in regards to the bilateral relations of the U.S.-Iran, but the indirect influence that Iran has in regards to countries like Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, you were highlighting. I want to touch on two areas particularly because I think they are timely and important. Right now, Syria is on the top of the news and of everybody's attention, particularly in regards to the pro-democracy movements we're seeing, challenging the Assad regime, the brutality that the Assad regime is taking in regards to its people, the condemnation it's getting internationally, but yet the entrenchment per se of that Assad regime. For years, for decades, Hezbollah has been a main ally of the Assad regime, and obviously the Iranian influence of Hezbollah is known by all. Yet, kind of counterintuitively, one would think that Iran would be supporting the Assad regime much more outright and Hezbollah, but yet they seem to be almost hesitating. We're not seeing that outright support, or at least it's not as public. What do you attribute that to? And kind of let's touch upon that situation a bit.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the support of the Islamic Republic for Assad is much deeper and stronger than is perceived. But on the other hand, they're shrewd. So what they're doing is they're hedging their bets. So they think that the likelihood of Assad falling is pretty high, even with the help of the Islamic Republic. So they're hedging their bets. They wouldn't mind to have some kind of influence, if not exactly the same kind of influence, on the future Syrian governments and regimes as they do with Assad. And you can see evidence of that through what's happening with Hamas, where right now Hamas, which was headquartered and based in Damascus and fed and protected by Assad, is distancing itself from the Syrian regime. And there is a conflict right now between the Islamic Republic and Hamas about that. So the Islamic Republic doesn't like the fact that Hamas is moving away from Assad. And so you can see what the intent is. And another evidence is what Hezbollah is doing. Hezbollah and Nasrallah came out recently, the first time he's out in public for a very long time, in defense of Assad and his regime. So Hezbollah is very much 100% behind the Syrian regime at the moment. And I think the Islamic Republic will do whatever he can to keep them in power, keep Assad in power, at least covertly. But they want to have the ability, the ability to deny it. Hopefully when the regime changes, and they won't have some kind of influence on Syria in the future.
Do you think that there might be some relation in regards to a lot of the pro-democracy activists, although I'm actually going to almost sound contradictory here, but I believe that the overall pro-democracy movement or the opposition activists are Democrats, and there are people that really want freedom, and they want democracy, and they want a better future. But as we've seen in a lot of these movements throughout the Arab Spring in North Africa and the Middle East, there have been pockets of fundamentalists, Islamists, etc. Do you think there might be any correlation there in regards to different pockets within the Syrian opposition that Hezbollah and Hamas might be particularly, trying to seduce per se, or not to antagonize at least?
I'm sure there's elements of that, but realistically, if there are Islamist factions of the opposition in Syria, they will probably be Sunni. So I doubt very much that Iran and Hezbollah, being Shia, would have much influence over those, which is the case in Egypt and Tunisia and Libya and all the other countries. But to come back to this point, because I think it's an important point generally, and I hate to generalize and I hate to sound like a pessimist.
So let me just clarify something. Yeah. So at the end of the day, always the Sunni versus Shia kind of schism will always overcome and overpower the fundamentalist schism. So it's not what you're saying. That's what I wanted to clarify.
It depends what the issue is.
Gotcha.
If the issue is Israel, then they will work together very happily.
One for all, and all for one.
Exactly. And when the issue is America or the Western colonialization or other issues like that, they have no problem working together. The Islamic Republic has worked with Al Qaeda for a number of years. They're working with the Sunni Taliban in Afghanistan, which historically have been their enemy. But when Taliban became America's enemy, they suddenly became Iran's friend. So I think this whole argument that certain quote-unquote experts make that there's no way on earth Shia Iran would work with Sunni Al-Qaeda or Hamas, that's ridiculous. But is not a natural partnership. It's a forced partnership based on the enemy.
Enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yes, and I think also the Syrian opposition, the Islamists within that the opposition, because Assad has such a close relationship with Islamic Republic, I think the knee-jerk reaction would be to do the opposite. And one sight that you've seen repeatedly in Syria is the burning of the Islamic Republic flag and the Hezbollah flag. So I think that sends a pretty clear message.
Talking about Hezbollah, I'd like to bring things a little bit closer to home. You talk Hezbollah, you remember in the 1990s the tragic bombings of the Israeli Friendship Institute and the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires. It caused hundreds or thousands of deaths. We're seeing that increasingly Hezbollah and Iran, through Hezbollah and independently now, has increased its presence here in Latin America, in the Western Hemisphere, per se. So Argentina in the 1990s. Then with Hugo Chavez rising to power in Venezuela, we've now seen a very close bond. Hugo Chavez starting daily flights to Damascus, daily flights to Tehran. In 2003, Fidel Castro and Ayatollah Khamenei said that together Iran and Cuba will bring the United States to their knees. So we're seeing an increased relationship. There was a documentary this weekend which showed that from Mexico that there was conversations and plans being hashed out with the Venezuelan, Iranian, and Cuban embassies to conduct cyber attacks against the United States. How close or how far is Iran willing to go in order to threaten and in order to really poke the United States in the eye?
I think they will go as far as they are allowed to. There's no limit for them. I think they demonstrated in Iraq that they're willing to support opposition, that they're willing to arm them, train them, and help them just blatantly kill American soldiers. So if they have that opportunity through Venezuela or Cuba, there's no reason why they wouldn't do that, unless they're stopped. It doesn't surprise me whatsoever about the news coming out recently about their influence and their cooperation with Chavez and Castro. Basically, you can tell the nature of an actor based on the friendships that they have. And I think Chavez and Castro and Khamenei and Nasrallah are great example of that. And
another example that for years, this has been going on for decades, but a lot of people forget that in the tri-border area, which is the tri-border area of Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay, has always been a center of finance for Hezbollah, in which a lot of the merchants in that it was kind of like a free trade zone, have been lots of fundraising and contraband takes place for Hezbollah in those areas, and a lot of the things that were used in Iran and Argentina in the 1990s attack came and were spawned from the tri-border region. I hate to generalize, and I generalized before, and I said, well, how far would Iran go? And when we talk about Iran, and you said it at the beginning, I think you're absolutely right. There's a difference between Iran and the Islamic Republic per se. Help me understand a little bit more in regards to the power structure of Iran. there's Gene Kirkpatrick, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and great intellectual, always used to made the big first differentiation between authoritarian dictatorships and totalitarian dictatorships. Totalitarian dictatorships being a la North Korea, Cuba, Burma today. Fortunately, they're less today than there were 20, 30 years ago, in which that regime controls everything: economy, social life, politics, and things of the sort, and they're usually kind of triangle in shape with one head, and basically everything else spawns from there. Authoritarian tend to be much more bureaucratic, more a la China today, a la Vietnam today, that they're not based on certain individuals or one structure, but more they control all politics, but they have certain specters of adjustments in the economy, so people have certain ability to conduct business, etc. Where does Iran fall in this?
Iran is unique in history, or the Islamic Republic is unique in history. It probably has a combination of both scenarios that you just talked about, with an added layer which makes it much worse of theocracy. So you do have that one dictator at the top. The difference between him and Chavez and the others you mentioned.
Let me clarify.
No, Chavez, Castro.
When you talk about the dictator on top, you're talking about the Ayatollah.
Khamenei, absolutely. Sure. The difference between Khamenei and Castro, for example, is that Khamenei claims that he's the representative of God on earth. Not even Castro goes that far, for God's sakes. So
he thinks he's God, but differently.
So it's not the law in his mind that makes him the ultimate say, is God. So therefore, no one can question anything he does or says. And if you do, in effect, you are questioning God and Islam, and you're Mahreb, and you were put to death. So Iran, it's a worst of all worlds in many ways.
But when people think of Iran a lot today, and kind of because of his eerie personality, people are trying to think of Ahmadinejad. Where does Ahmadinejad fall within this kind of dictatorship scale of the Ayatollah Ahmadinejad?
Okay.
You know what?
We just got a minute notice, so I think we need a little more than a minute to talk about that. So
let's do this. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about Ahmadinejad, the power structure. I want to talk about the Green Movement. One of the things that has most inspired me every time I've seen the student movements in the last 10 years that have really gone out there, what the women do. I think people have no concept of the great risk that these women student activists suffer and what they go through that we don't even know all of it. So I want to talk about the Green Movement. I want to talk about the student movement. I want to talk about the opposition generally. And with that, we're going to take a break. This is from Washington El Mundo. We'll be back with my dear friend Shahriar Etminani to talk about Iran.
Perfect. Thank you.